And so Matt Condon came here yesterday, right? The young entrepreneur star of our city in many ways, won the Chamber of Commerce's Small Business Award a couple of years ago. Matt Condon had one little physical therapy place in Kansas City with 2 employees the year my daughter hurt her hamstring playing high school soccer. And we were looking for a place for her to go. We showed up at Matt Condon's place. And while she was out there getting therapy, Matt Condon walked out and said, "I recognize you from somewhere." And so we figured out how we knew each other, and we spent the next 6 weeks, every week when my daughter went for therapy, doing his business plan. So we'd go in his conference room when my daughter was being electroshocked and worked on his business plan, and he sold his company for more than I'll ever be worth. And I'm getting nothing out of the deal. So the introduction said that I became the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in 2011, and then that continued through the year 2012. We're on a November 1 to November 1 time. And I don't know about you, but I serve on a lot of boards. I go on a lot of leadership trips, and you know the person who sits on these boards, and they're on 10 different boards, and they go to each one, and they sit there during the meeting, and they don't ask any questions, and then they don't really get involved in a committee, and they don't show up for the dinners, they don't challenge authority or the status quo, and then they go back to work? I don't like wasting my time. And in my opinion, people that are doing that are somehow thinking they're fulfilling their duty, but in my opinion, they're not. In fact, they're probably taking up the space of someone who might fulfill their duty. And so it's so funny that Jim and I have become such good friends over the Big Five, and one of the reasons is I was in the room when Jim got picked. So Jim Heeter is one of the most revered, basically one of the most feared attorneys in Kansas City. So we all wanted to get him out of law. And I remember being on the selection committee to choose who was going to be the new president of the Chamber of Commerce. And I'm sitting there, and there's 8 or 10 of us in the room, and the first person, Jim Heeter walks in. And I leaned to the person next to me, and I said, "I didn't know Jim Heeter was on the selection committee." And I think it was David Fowler. Yeah. And he said, "He's a candidate." And I went, "Oh, well, then what in the hell are we doing? Let's just pick him and be done with it," because I don't think we've had anybody in the history of our town that was ever more prepared. And I think in organizations like this, so often we think we got to go find somebody from out of town, or we think we got to go find somebody who's maybe who's done that their whole life, where the truth is you might have an executive right in front of you who just might be the perfect person to lead your organization, and who might understand that mattering in life might be more important than making a bunch of extra money for your last few years. Or you can get Jim's job and do both, maybe. So anyway, I'm coming into my year as chamber chair, and Jim's only about to start his 2nd year, and we'd already become pretty good friends. And I went to him and I said, "Kansas City has a couple of challenges, in my opinion, related to business issues and how we come together as a community that you guys have conquered. So I could probably count 5 or 6 civic organizations in Kansas City that, depending on the day and depending on the task, think they're in charge. That's a problem." Now, sometimes here it works out pretty darn good, because you have a lot of people you can muster and put on a problem, but a lot of times it's a challenge. And in Kansas City, one of the challenges we have is 30-year plans. So we have about 30 of them, depending on what year we studied it. And we have a lot of plans that are up on the shelf, to create the golden city in the sky. And some really good things have come out of them. But at the same time, it seems like we're always studying. And I said, "Hey, Jim, the chamber in this town is the bare-knuckle fighter, in my opinion. And we have to do issues, and we have to do some things that are longer term, but basically we're the bare knuckle that really has to go in and fight for something when it's time to fight for something." And I said, "I have this idea to say, let's bring the whole city together and let's find 5 things, very specific things, that we want to accomplish over the next X years. And when we tick one off, maybe we'll add another one. That'll be up to the next chamber chair or the next chamber chair." And I thought that the process of doing it might actually be more important than the things that we chose. and we'll get Jim's opinion on that here in just a second. And so we went through an entire 12-month process, celebrated at the end, and chose 5 things. Jim?
Hey, Greg, thanks. And as always, you are overly generous in your comments about me, but I'll kind of come right back at you. I told you a little bit yesterday morning when I had the privilege of welcoming you at the Kauffman Foundation to Kansas City. You could tell how excited and happy I and our Chamber of Commerce and our entire community are to have 175 civic and business leaders of Lexington, Kentucky in Kansas City for 3 days. But I mentioned to you a little bit about Greg Graves and Burns and McDonnell. One thing, I'm not asking you to do it right now, but sometime today, Google this man, Google Greg Graves, and Google his firm, Burns and McDonnell. As I told you yesterday, it's one of the largest and most successful engineering firms in the world, and it's also one of the best places to work, according to Fortune magazine, in the nation. So Greg is, in addition to running an extraordinary company, is one of our, I'll use the word, revered, despite his relative youth.
Go on.
One of our most, he loves this. We have become very close friends. We would have been really good friends anyway. You know, sometimes chamber CEOs in their chairs, we work so closely together, you do become close. And in Greg, in my case, we become very, very close friends, in part because of the Big Five. Probably would have happened anyway, but partly because we worked so much, so closely for so long on the Big Five. A couple of thoughts about the Big Five. What we're going to show you a video in just a few minutes about the Big Five, which will tell you a little bit more about the individuals. Then we'll make a few more comments and then open it up for questions. And then because Linda and Bob have given us plenty of time this morning, after we have done that, if you want to talk about anything else in Kansas City, we will be happy to talk about that because we're both obviously involved in a lot of different things. About the Big Five, Greg sometimes says, and he'd be totally correct, that we actually began this conversation almost really before I took the job, because the notion was to do something like this. We weren't exactly sure what the something was, but we wanted to do something big. We wanted to use the chamber. Since this is a chamber trip, I'm going to say this: chambers of commerce are extraordinary vehicles. I have become so much more respectful and admiring of chambers of commerce in the last 6 years in this job, because when I look at great cities around the country like Lexington or Charlotte or Indianapolis or Denver, what I find in every one of those cities that's doing so many good things, I find a strong chamber of commerce. Bob, wouldn't that be you're nodding your head? A strong chamber of commerce at the core of that. So part of what we wanted to do was to leverage the Chamber of Commerce and use it really as a kind of a platform to do something really big, not just for Kansas City, Missouri, but for our entire region. And one of the things that Greg commented upon, and I think he's spot on, he said, you know, every organization, every company, even a lot of municipalities, governments, have a plan, a strategic plan, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan. But for us, Greater Kansas City, which we began to call Big KC, just Big KC as opposed to Greater Kansas City or the Greater Kansas City region or Regional Kansas City, Big KC. Big KC did not have a plan. So part of what we were attempting to do, and I think with some success with the Big Five, was to create a plan of action for Big KC, for Greater Kansas City. Second thing that's really important, Greg alluded to, we did not want to do a strategic plan. We got some of those. They're sitting on shelves gathering dust. Maybe Lexington has some of them too. I don't know. Most communities do. We've certainly got our share. Greg and I are the kinds of individuals and organizational leaders that are very action-focused, action-based, as opposed to study. We've never been accused of not doing our homework. We've never been accused of not being thoughtful and focused. Quite the contrary. On the other hand, we're not task force people and commission people and studies people. So the approach we really took was this. Imagine if all of a sudden you were CEO of Big KC, of Greater Kansas City for a day. You're CEO. What are the things you would like to accomplish in, let's say, the first 3 to 5 years of your tenure as CEO of Big KC? And that really is the focus of the Big Five. We could have picked 7 items, we could have picked 3, we discussed that. We settled on 5. So that's kind of the approach that we took. The principles we employed were something like these, because as Herb mentioned yesterday morning and again today, a part of what I know you're studying and looking at is how this community makes decisions. how we decide what it is we're going to do, how we decide what we're not going to do, how we focus resources on the things that we say we want to do. So in the process of this, we had some principles. To accomplish what I just described to you, we wanted a process that was informal. We wanted a process that was completely open, everybody can play. We wanted the process that was transparent. People could look right in and see what we were doing and how we were doing it and give us their thoughts and tell us, by the way, if they want to play. And those were kind of the guiding principles. On informality, we decided, and this is, if there's any genius in this, there are two pieces of genius, and I'm going to credit Greg with both of them.
Agreed.
4 pieces
Well,
of
let me
genius.
see what they
Four
are
pieces
first.
of genius.
Let me see what they are.
At least 2 strong pieces of genius, and I'm going to credit Greg with them. The first is this. So we have decided what we want to do and why we want to do it, and we have kind of these principles in mind. We know what we don't want to do, what we do want to do, and we have some principles in mind that I just described to you. So how do you go about doing that? Well, the first thing we did was we recognized that we were thinking big. We were pretty much outside the box here, and we were taking some risk. Because when we kicked this off, we didn't know. In hindsight, it's hard to believe that we didn't know this would be a success, but we didn't know. For all we know, we'd have a lot of people say, hey, that's a great idea, but I'm busy. We might have some people say, what are you guys smoking? Or we might have some people say, we don't need to do that for this reason, that reason, or 17 other reasons. We did not know. We simply didn't know. So part of the lesson here, I think, is to don't be afraid to think big, and don't be afraid to take some risk. So what's the first step in this process? And this is genius. The idea was to have a series of what Greg referred to as no bad ideas meeting. No bad ideas meetings. And these were a number of meetings. We started off with, 17, 26, something like that, of these meetings. We expanded that to eventually about 36. But they were groups of people that would range anywhere from 10 or so to as many as, in a couple of cases, 60 or so. And they were led by people from all over the community and from all walks of life and endeavor.
So one of the fun parts was we actually invited 17 people from around town to chair these No Bad Ideas meetings, and 16 of the 17 said yes. That's pretty rare in any city. And the one that said no was the head of the editorial board from the Kansas City Star. Because he said, our job is to criticize your ideas, not to help you create
to jump in and be the supporter.
That's almost a quote. And so, but we had 16, these 16 meetings, and they were the regional mayors, the top 10, the biggest 10 companies in town's CEOs came. And then the next meeting would be neighborhood leaders from the poorest neighborhoods in our whole town. Then we would have a Kansas-side group of companies. Then we would have area development agencies. And then we had a group of higher education leaders. And then we had elementary school teachers. And once we got going, we started getting calls from people that said, hey, we want to have a No Bad Ideas. Why did you leave us out? And then we ended up having 25. Because we said yes to everybody, right? And we ended up having 25. One of them was a call-in radio show that Jim and I hosted a couple of times, and we found out you could have bad ideas.
By the way, I'll just tell you this. I'm not going to tell you the answer. The 2 questions I get the most often are, okay, what was number 6? I get that. And the other one is, okay, what were the worst ideas that you heard?
There were bad ideas.
If we have enough time, we'll share a little bit of that with you,
Should we do that video? Should we do the video?
Let me just wrap up just with one or 2 other things here. And back to that email to folks about holding these No Bad Ideas meetings. Again, we didn't know the response we'd get. And actually, the afternoon that we finalized the email over lunch. This is a little more granular than I would normally get into, but for this particular group, I want to do this. So we finalized the email. So I think at 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock that afternoon, we were scheduled, Greg and I were going to be at a meeting of a number of civic and business leaders, which was at the Stowers Institute, one of the best funded medical research institutions in the world, just a few blocks down the street from us here. And we could easily, and we considered going to that group and saying, here's what we're thinking about doing, what do you think? Well, we decided not to do that. We decided to send the email. So we're in a posture at this point, not knowing what the result is going to be, of possibly seeking forgiveness as opposed to asking for permission. That may be another lesson in terms of process. And by midnight that night, we knew we were onto something, because those emails asking these civic and business and philanthropic leaders to host these No Bad Ideas meetings, I think everybody, with the one exception that Greg mentioned, had responded yes, and enthusiastically yes. So by midnight, we knew that we were absolutely onto something. So that's the way the Big Five started. That's why it started. That's what we hope to achieve. Greg, two things we should mention. First of all, Scott, would you raise your hand? This is Scott Hall. Scott, like me, is a recovering lawyer. And believe me, we're both in full recovery from the practice of law. But Greg and I were colleagues in luring Scott away from a great law firm and a great law practice a couple of years ago to come to the Chamber as our Vice President for Strategic Initiatives, which essentially is the Big Five. So Scott is the person who's helping us get all of this done. So Scott, it's great that you could be here. The second thing we probably should mention is, if you notice the tail end there, we talked about the newest number 5. That was what we adopted last year. That is kindergarten readiness, which ties into grade level reading. But it's an important precursor to that. The reason that's the new number 5 is this, that we have accomplished, we have checked the box on one of the original Big Five that you didn't see up there. And that was to create the World Symposium on Animal Health Science here in Kansas City. A corridor starting about 2 miles west of us at Kansas State University in the veterinary school, and extending about 2 hours east of us along the I-70 corridor to the University of Missouri, where there is a veterinary school. 40% of the world's assets in animal health science, which has been a strategic initiative in our community for more than 10 years, are located in that corridor. So we wanted to plant the flag and have the World Symposium. That has been accomplished, so that's what gave us the flexibility last year to go to a new number 5, which is kindergarten readiness, and that's what you saw at the end of that video. Greg?
So Jim and I will take you through the process that we did, and then let's do Q&A. Okay, so we had 24 No Bad Idea meetings. They all went, except for the radio show, exactly the same way. Jim and I in front of a group of 6 to 60, and with 2 podiums behind us and 2 blank sheets of paper, and we both had a pen. And we said this and that. We're not going to tell you what our ideas are. We're not going to tell you what our thoughts are. We want your big ideas, and the only rules are there are no bad ideas, and it has to be a thing. It has to be a thing. That was the biggest challenge.
Yeah, be specific. What exactly is it that you would have us do?
When I was meeting with the urban neighborhood leaders, it was, we have a crime problem down here. Stand there with my pen. Okay, give me an idea. We need to do something about crime. I agree with that. Give me an idea. And eventually, well, of course, I think the Big 10 CEOs, okay, and of which I'm one, they were the worst.
Yes.
We need political leadership to get off their butt and do something. Okay, give me an idea. give me an idea, my best client in front of me. I reject that. And so that was but it was great fun, because very quickly it was, hey, let's move money from this in the city budget and start having walking cops through these neighborhoods. Idea. No criticism, very little discussion on each idea, but then that idea would be, it would be even better if we probably would want them on horses, and they probably ought to be in combos, and we probably only want them in these neighborhoods. Another idea. Or we're meeting with the educators. And some of it was always about the subject that they lead, but very quickly, the meetings would expound to solving other people's problems in town, et cetera, et cetera. And every once in a while we'd have to go, no, big KC. What's good for everybody? What would be meaningful to everybody? And everybody came together. And at the end of that process, we had 182 ideas.
Yeah. All I would add is this, as Greg mentioned, this gives new meaning to the phrase low tech. This was as low tech as anything can possibly be. These no bad ideas were actually more about our one attempt at tech didn't work so well. We'll tell you about that in a little while if we have time. But these no bad ideas meetings were incredibly low tech. It was just Greg and me with magic markers and a couple of easels. We did have somebody in the back of the room to make sure they were writing down all the good ideas, all the ideas, period, in case we missed any, but it was just us at the front of the room with our easels and our magic markers. The other corollary to that really is this. The question that I get a whole lot from other chambers of commerce and also some local governments who are impressed with this is, who was your consultant? Who'd you hire? Well, the answer is there was no consultant. We didn't hire. It saved us $250,000 right off the bat and also enabled us to get something actually done, as otherwise we might still be in the process of all this. So that was the way we went about this.
So then we had a meeting in the chamber boardroom. All 24 leaders from those groups were there. Plus we invited another 50. There were probably 50, 60 people there. And we announced we were going to cut the list from 182 to 20 that day. And there were fistfights, and there were screaming and hollering, and we did bring in...
That was our one attempt at tech.
Yes, and we used voting machines. So you voted, right? Jim, that was a really bad idea of yours.
Well, actually, it was a good idea. It just didn't work.
I think it was my idea. And so, literally, the guy that ran the voting machines was from Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I shouldn't call him out. Was from Georgia Tech, and we fired him at lunch.
Well, we had to make an executive decision because this was not working.
We called him into the room, you're fired, and he refused to leave, but he sat in the back. And so we changed the process, and we would take lists of ideas to the tables, and we'd say, you need to take this list from 10 to 5, and you have 30 minutes. Okay. And then we just carved and moved around, and then we would put them all up on the board, and people could object, that one should go back on, et cetera, et cetera. And somehow, eventually people get tired. And so eventually we got the list of 20. And then I think it was probably the only circumvention that you and I ever did was when we went from 20 to 10, it was basically you and me in the room, a couple other chamber CEO who've been chairs, a couple of your staff. We did some combinations and sort of created them into what could really be big 5 ideas. The making of America's most entrepreneurial city, the downtown campus for dance and theater or whatever it was, for the conservatory, the University of Missouri Kansas City Conservatory, which is music and dance, the downtown camp. And we had 10 pretty good ones. Yep. And then we had a meeting of the executive committee of the chamber, plus the 24 again. And we went around the room and people voted for their first and voted for their second. And I think it was only when we got down to 5 versus 6 versus 7 that it became cantankerous at all. Yeah. And eventually we had our 5.
But kind of what was interesting is, I mentioned to you at the outset, we didn't know what the result was when we hit the send button on that email. Because keep in mind, we're thinking big, we're taking some risk, and we didn't know what we were going to get back. The next thing that was kind of interesting was when we went through this narrowing process that Greg described. So off the bat, we've got lots of support and enthusiastic support. Cool. The next thing to worry about was what happens when the people who have advanced this idea or that idea or these 4 ideas don't get that in the big 5. Do they fall off the bandwagon? Or are they no longer supportive of the overall initiative? Are they even working against some parts of the overall initiative? The fact is, none of that happened. 0. People were so excited about the notion that even when their idea fell out from the big 5, they were still enthusiastically supportive of the big 5 that remain.
My company does a lot of transportation work, design and construction. So you're driving a road in town in Kansas City the next few days, we probably had something to do with it. And probably the one group that was mad at us at the end was the heavies. So the heavy constructors organization, that the big yellow iron guys. And Jim and I said, we wish one of the big 5 was a transportation idea. What's your idea? Well, spend more on transportation. What's your idea? And the truth is, we never came down with what we thought could be a concrete, distinct idea.
And I think the last thing we might mention before we open up the question is this. I mentioned there were at least two important pieces of genius in all this. And the second, you kind of saw on the video, But that piece of genius is to get a, quote, champion. That's the word we used then. It's the word we use now. To step up in a community, a recognized civic leader, typically a major CEO, for whom there is no word failure on the resume anywhere, people who know how to get things done. We found a champion for every one of these big five, who when we announced them, not later, but at the day we announced these to the community, we had a champion, a CEO, civic leader who stepped up and said, I got this one, I got it. And that was...
And you met a couple of them yesterday. Leo Morton for the downtown campus. You guys met, was Terry Dunn at some of your dinners last night from Dunn Construction. He started the urban neighborhood initiative, and so...
And you met former Mayor Kay Barnes yesterday, as I recall, and you see that she is one of our champions of our newest number 5 on kindergarten readiness, grade level reading.
Should we open it up?
Let's open it up for questions. Questions, comments.
Idea, and what was number 6?
Bob, what was that?
What was the number 6 idea, and then what was the worst idea?
So you're coming... why don't you take either one of those?
A very high-ranking CEO in Kansas City, who you haven't met, thought a good idea would be to do a giant putt-putt golf course that would link the downtown to the Crossroads district, and he believed in it strongly, and I supported him, but Jim said it was terrible.
It takes your breath away to hear that idea, but it's true. That actually happened.
I'd say 6 probably was transportation, because I think if we would have had we have our loop, you know, we have an interstate loop that goes around our downtown, and it sort of confines the definition of downtown. We're sort of beating it now, especially with the new downtown hotel, if we do it. But we've always had that physical problem, and I always thought, or people have talked about creating part of that loop to be a tunnel. That would have been a big idea, so that the downtown could spread, but the truth is they never really had one that was close enough.
Yeah, I would agree with Greg on both
you have
those.
a hand. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Through your process, when you had ideas that you couldn't implement for some reason, or that just didn't rise to the surface, how did you get feedback back to the people so that they confirmed that it wasn't going to be a priority?
I think the key is what Jim said. So that, first of all, that person was in the room, maybe when that idea was eliminated or changed. And real often in this town, I don't know if it's true in Lexington or not, but usually in this town, people accept that, oh, wow, those 5 really are bigger than my idea. And some of those have moved on. The downtown hotel was one that was discussed as one of the big 5. And now that's a project that's, you know, starting to have legs. And the other thing is, we never said that we couldn't do all 182 things, but if we would have tried to do all 182, we'd have done none. And I think that was the whole premise of it, and I think people accepted that. And it's not that everybody was happy.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And there are a number of ideas that surface in the process which we continue to support, and directly and indirectly, and which have come or are coming to fruition. 2 other pieces, because back to the process piece that you all are interested in, but one of the things that we wanted to do with the Big 5, remember we talked yesterday a little bit about the state line, and you've heard other people talk about our state line issues, but part of what Greg and I hoped to do, which I think was accomplished, was to get people to think above the state line, just like you all do as business folks. You don't pay much attention to state lines, but you think above it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to ignore it and pretend like it wasn't there, but to think above it, which is a close corollary, to use that word again, of bringing people together in a collaborative fashion. And so 2 of the intended consequences of this, quietly, maybe not spoken, were to think above the state line about Greater Kansas City, what we call Big KC, and also to come together collaboratively on these ideas. I will also tell you that one of the key pieces of that collaboration had to do with our leadership exchange, exactly what you all are doing here. The friendships, the relationships that were formed and are being formed here this morning and on your trip were really important to all this, and they continue to be important.
Yesterday we heard from George Guastello. Oh, I'm back here. right here.
Oh my God.
We heard from George Guastello about Union Station, and then I heard that your company donated another $1 million today to
We
Union
did,
Station
yeah,
in Science
yeah.
City, which is an amazing thing.
Thank you.
And to me, Union Station was obviously another big idea where it was shuttered, and the civic and corporate and philanthropic community rallied around, and you did this amazing thing. And then flash forward, and I'm sure there were many things in between, but flash forward to this big five. And it seems to me that there's something sort of in the water in Kansas City about this hyper-connected and involved corporate community that where leaders such as yourself and others are both intensely civically involved, you're philanthropically involved, both personally and professionally, and that is what makes something like the Big Five possible. And I wonder if you could talk about what you think it is in Kansas City that, you know, what is the culture or what fosters that kind of corporate, civic, and philanthropic involvement, and what would you tell another city who might want to emulate that?
Really? Okay. So yeah, my company, we do this competition in town called Battle of the Brains, and we started it 5 years ago. And it's a science and engineering competition between elementary, middle school, and high school students. And they have to create and propose what should be the next science exhibit at the Science Center at Union Station. We call it Science City. And we had 250 schools and 3,000 kids participate 3 years ago. One of the keys is we give the schools $150,000. So $50,000 to the top elementary school, $50,000 to the top high school proposal, and then $50,000 to all the second and third and fourth place winners. We have a big party for the kids, and then the kids who actually design the winning exhibit, they come to Burns McDonnell and they work directly with our architects, engineers, science people, et cetera, to create and build their own exhibit at Science City, and it's been a really huge success. And my firm is 100% employee owned, and so I always remind them, this is their money I'm giving away. It's not my money I'm giving away, it's their money I'm giving away. But the attitude in this town comes from the last generation of the great entrepreneurs that built our town. So it's Joyce Hall and his son Don Hall Sr. who turned Hallmark into this international, huge, successful corporation. It's Ewing Kauffman. Some of you are going to go to the Kauffman Center today. Yesterday you were at the Kauffman Foundation, is that right? Yeah, I mean the greatest entrepreneur and philanthropist in the history of our town. I sit in his office because when he died and they moved the company out, our company bought his offices. His office speaks to you, you know. And so Henry Block, you saw, the founder of H&R Block, and it goes on and on from there. Every one of those leaders, not a couple, every one of those leaders lives by this vow almost, or this duty that, you know, when you die, you're going to give your money away. So what the hell are you waiting for? And every one of them just started. And they did things that were good for their city, and they did things that were good for education, and they built the University of Missouri in Kansas City in some ways, and the Stowers Institute. I guess I'd add Jim Stowers to that, who gave his whole company away to philanthropy. And now you have this generation of some rising wealth in our town that I'm not sure always gets that. But enough of them do that it's always easy to come here and come around an idea and say, hey, we're trying to raise money for this or that. But I really think it was that greatest generation. It was the World War II generation, and probably true in Lexington too, of people who built up all this wealth, almost always from nothing. And I think all of those examples were from nothing. And they just look forward to giving it away. My wife and I have that attitude of we're going to give it away when you die anyway. And so find something good to do now. And so do you have better comments than that?
I certainly have no better comments than that. I think you hit the nail exactly.
Go ahead.
And we were talking with Herb and Bob earlier. This is a town where philanthropy plays an enormous role. If you drive around this town, I think a lot of Kansas Cityans frankly don't appreciate this, but when you do what Greg and I do, you understand it, appreciate it, and respect it. A lot of what you see in Kansas City is a direct result of what Greg just described. It was entrepreneurs who did very, very, very well and have left great foundations which support our community in lots of tangible ways today.
So let's take a good example. Let's take the urban neighborhood
Yeah.
initiative. So one of our big five is the urban neighborhood initiative. The idea came from, I'd say, a 40-year-old black woman in our urban core No Bad Ideas session. And we'd already had our meeting with the CEOs, et cetera, and they didn't really offer ideas. There was more instructions, as I recall. And but they had a few ideas and thoughts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then when you got down to that group, and the first idea was, the lady said, we'd be happy if we had a grocery store. You know, because our city, we're a pretty big city. By land area, we're a huge city. And so we have some real urban core poverty issues in this town. It's a very distinct line, like it is in so many cities, but it is not okay. It is not okay. And that woman said, you know, I just don't think it's going to work if we hire 100 police officers to walk all these neighborhoods. And I just don't think it's going to work if you hand every kid, you know, $100 or whatever, or a new jobs program or a financial security program. But what if we just took a couple of neighborhoods, and boy was there a fight over what they would be, a couple of neighborhoods and try to fix everything. And I remember a couple of CEOs in town, where I remember one specifically saying, okay, the Urban Neighborhood Initiative, that was a waste of a choice. And if there was a number one that we were always going to pick, it was the Urban Neighborhood Initiative. Even a couple times that it almost fell on the board, we just slide it back in there, as I recall. But I had a CEO in town said that was a waste of a choice because it'll never work. I said, okay, I get you. I said, what if we took one house and I got him a job and you went over at night and read to the kids because apparently they need books in their house. And we had a full-time security guard standing outside their door, and we drove the kids to school every day so they could do soccer practice and stuff because they're afraid to leave, or maybe they don't have okay, I get it. Okay, Greg, you could do one house. I go, okay, well, why don't we do just one block? We'll do a block of 10 houses. Well, it got pretty big, but this weekend, the Dolly Parton Imagination Library is canvassing every house in the Urban Neighborhood Initiative. And if you don't know what the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, it is you sign your child up from birth to kindergarten. We will send you a book in your child's name to your mailbox every month of their life until they have 60 books. And 40 of my employees, along with 250 people overall around. Was this weekend or was it last weekend? No, okay, I almost blew it. And including my wife, are going to walk these neighborhoods and try to sign up these kids. Because it's not that this single mom doesn't want her kid to have a book, but she doesn't have access or knowledge, or she's concerned or whatever about how to get in a program like that. And so I just feel like on ones like that, you just got to start. And when it came to, okay, where are we going to get all these books from? Where are we going to get all this money from? Oh, don't worry about that. That's a non-issue in our town. How are you going to raise the dough? The issue is how are you going to get the actual change made?
You know, it's really important on that Urban Neighborhood Initiative. Greg is exactly right. There were a number of folks who didn't understand how a Chamber of Commerce could be into urban redevelopment, who could be into rebuilding the urban core. But Greg is exactly right. We're the kind of chamber, we have the kind of business leadership in this community for whom that was actually the highest priority of the Big Five. And this year alone, you're going to see three, I'm reasonably confident, three major brick and mortar projects coming out of that effort. One is to rebuild an entire neighborhood called the Mannheim neighborhood. That's with the Make It Right Foundation, if that rings a bell. Think Brad Pitt, think Katrina, think the rebuilding of Lower Ninth Ward. We have a partnership with them, and they're partnering with us to rebuild an important neighborhood in this urban core area. The second is the grocery store that Greg described in the urban food desert. The third is actually something we call purpose-built communities, which is based out of Atlanta, which will be multi-use, it'll be residential, it'll be a new charter school, it'll be a host of things. So that's happening, and it's happening because of the Chamber's Big Five Urban Neighborhood Initiative and the kind of business leadership that we have in the Chamber and in our community.
If an urban core African-American male, so not suburbs, an urban core African-American male cannot read proficiently by 3rd grade, the odds are 75% they will live their entire life on welfare or in prison. Now you tell me a better business incentive to do something the hell about it than the cost, if you will, even if you have no heart at all, just of the cost of that. And so we're rallied, and there are challenges. One of our challenges about the Big Five is, okay, Urban Neighborhood Initiative, we're trying to boil the ocean, right? And a couple of them, like downtown campus, you get it and you're done, right? The International Symposium on Animal Health, get it, you're done. Well, now we're going to try to do pre-K education, kindergarten readiness, boiling the ocean. And so eventually all of your ideas can't be boiling the ocean, right? Or you can never interject new things, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that if the Big Five continues past Jim and me, the next couple of things they pick are going to have to be very distinct. Let's get this down in the next 2 years and move on, right? Okay, I saw somebody with the mic.
Oh, you were touching on exactly my question, which was, how are you measuring your outcomes and staying accountable to your Big Five? Obviously, you feel like you've got the old number 5, quote, accomplished. How do you make sure 5 years from now that that's still accomplished?
I think this one's you.
Well, we did pledge. You recall that at the outset I said one of our principles was transparency. Well, I guess closer to that is accountability. So one of the things that we said to the community, and that really means the media, because it's the media that really follows this most closely, is that we would be accountable, that we would report on a regular basis our progress on each of the Big Five initiatives, and we do that. And the media holds. By the way, the Kansas City Star has been, despite the fact that probably for good reason, the publisher of the Kansas City Star declined our invitation to host one of our No Bad Ideas meetings, probably a very good judgment on her part. But the Kansas City Star and the media generally has been very favorably disposed toward this. But we're very candid about where we are. Some of these things, for example, like America's Most Entrepreneurial City, Urban Neighborhood Initiative, those will go on, we hope, forever. I mean, those don't have a finite endpoint. And those two in particular took a good solid year of just building kind of infrastructure to get ready to have the kind of success that we're having today. And so we would report on that, and people understood it. They got it. They got it. So that's what we do.
Here, Jim.
So this is an amazing success story, and we're hearing about it and taking it back to our community because we happen to be here. I mean, what you've done kind of parallels, there's a book, Switch, Making Change When Change is Difficult. What are you doing to publicize this? Are you having a book written? Are you making a movie? Are you doing something so that everybody in the world sees exactly what you did and doesn't have to, come here on a chamber trip to hear about it?
So we talked about the book I did, didn't we? So I think we're years from calling. Okay, maybe the process was a success. We've checked off one, but that's not a success yet. So if 3rd grade proficiency goes up in the Urban Neighborhood Initiative and we can prove it, from 25%, because it's awful, to 75%, and if the U.S. News and World Report calls us America's most entrepreneurial city, where, okay, we're not going to be, San Francisco, but we're making huge progress on that, huge progress. If the downtown campus opens up, downtown, which was an idea that came directly out of one of our, then I think we could declare success. Right now, what I think is we have a really good idea that's halfway through maybe being able to call itself a success. But I think we're a long ways from raising any flags.
Well, I would say this. We were a little reluctant in the first couple of years to be tooting our horn too much because we didn't know what actual success we were going to have. I think we're far enough down the road now to say that we have achieved a number of actual tangible successes. Just mentioned a couple in terms of Urban Neighborhood Initiative. I'll give you one in a second about America's Most Entrepreneurial City. We talked about one of the boxes we've checked. So we actually probably could do something now. it's kind of interesting. We've been asked to speak at a few places around the country, including I've been asked to speak at the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives, where we talk about all this. Part of the success, by the way, is back to that word process. Part of what we did by bringing the community together just to focus on these things and to identify these things. I'll also say this, when we launched this, we had a number of people say, this is very cool. You won't have success with all 5 of these, but if you have success with 2 or 3, you will have really moved the needle. You will have done something way cool. Well, we've actually checked one box, and we're making great progress in having successes on every single one of the others. So I think we've had actually quite a bit of success. On the entrepreneurship, I'll just give you an example on America's Most Entrepreneurial City. Peter De Silva, whom you saw here, who was the chair of the chamber, actually immediately preceding Greg. Peter was the chair of our entrepreneurship, the champion of our entrepreneurship initiative. He's head of UMB Bank, which is one of our 2 largest banks in Kansas City. Peter has, with his leadership and with the spotlight on making Kansas City America's most entrepreneurial city, we have created an entrepreneurial movement, and you heard about some of that yesterday from Matt Condon. But here's the thing. On Tuesday, the governor of the state of Missouri, Jay Nixon, was in town on the campus of the University of Missouri, Kansas City. You heard from Leo Morton yesterday. And the governor was here to give us about $8 million as a match to $8 million of private money. That happened as a direct result of the Chamber's Big 5 Entrepreneurship Initiative. Because one of the things that we concluded about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, Scott, was that we needed a physical place for all this to come together and happen. And how do we do that? Well, we got some money from the Kauffman Foundation, from some trusts, from some other private sources. We went to the state and said, we've done our share, will you match this? The governor says, and the legislator said, we'll match it. So now we have $15-16 million to create this center on the campus of University of Missouri, Kansas City. That would have never even been thought about, much less accomplished, but for this. That's a tangible
We had
success.
a second-tier capital problem in this town. And I think just through inertia, now there are multiple, one that my wife and I are involved in is called Flyover Capital. And so we're the flyover states, right? And so we only invest in startup companies that are around this area. And so I think, sometimes just talking about stuff, you can sort of make some progress, and I think that's on several. And the truth is, we're pretty close to, it's not me, but the chamber is pretty close to declaring success on another Big 5, I think, probably in the next
That'll happen
few,
this year,
few
without
months.
question.
And so the fun process then comes around. That's not even the important part. The important part then is creating that consensus again about what the new one should be. The second time when we got to name a new Big 5, so the first time when we did them, we were having these nobody did sessions, people came and it was sort of casual, et cetera, et cetera. Then we declared success and said we're going to name a new Big 5, and we had 50 people or so in the room at Union Station, and people came to present. They didn't just show up and go, how about a bridge, or et cetera, et cetera. People came and presented their ideas, and they presented them with passion. The mayor of Kansas City, Missouri came, or had a group come, and presented with a passion on reading levels, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's when we thought, okay, we've created something here.
Back
I don't know
to
where the
your
mic- oh, yeah.
back to your urban neighborhood initiative. Can you guys talk a little bit about what's taken place since then and what's considered here the murder factory, that 8 square miles of an area that's gotten quite a bit of national attention? So wanted to know specifically what have you guys have done
Well, we
in
can
that
both
area?
comment on that. Greg?
Well, the neighborhoods that we're focused on are in that zip code. Same. Well, and the grocery store is not in the UNI, but it's close. And the financial readiness thing is close. And then the third grade reading level is close, or is in the initiative. We have a full-time CEO of the initiative now. Her name is Diane Cleaver. She's Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver's wife. She's awesome. We have staff. We have money. And I don't know, we have 15, 20 initiatives now?
Yes,
Probably going on?
easily in the urban neighborhood initiative, you bet. But Greg, is key pieces there are remember that comment about taking a year to build infrastructure? On that particular one, for example, we organized the Urban Neighborhood Initiative Board, really a not-for-profit corporation. We got that done pro bono, by the way, by a leading law firm. That may be the best documented not-for-profit in America because it was all done pro bono, and the woman who did the work is one of the national experts on not-for-profits, and her managing partner said, which is the Polsinelli law firm, said, go to it, do it just like you would a for-profit. So it's a gold-plated not-for-profit corporation with a great board. We have fundraising, we have staff that Greg mentioned, Diane Cleaver, the former First Lady of Kansas City and now the wife of our Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, is our executive director. And without all that, by the way, you couldn't accomplish this. You simply couldn't. So it took a year to put that in place. The other thing I guess I'd say about the Urban Neighborhood Initiative is this, as sort of a learning point. Our initial notion, because we're trying to bring business principles to this, it's not a social programs, although we get into a lot of social programs, it's really more bring a business approach to rebuilding our urban core. The original idea was to have a relatively smaller area to accomplish these things and then say, see what we can do, and now let's expand it kind of contiguously. Well, long story short, it actually turned out, as Greg mentioned, into a pretty good sized area. So we have a number of things going on throughout a good part of the urban core.
For example,
of
on
Kansas City,
crime, we got the new, not the police headquarters, but the new battalion that they built out there, and we wanted it. We said we want it right here, and so that always helps. And I think the long-term solution obviously is education. These kids have to be educated and have hope that there's going to be that they're going to live past 22 years old. And which some of them don't really see that. And so that's what we have to inject in there. And it's going to be hard as hell. But I can tell you that the neighborhood leaders from those groups believe that this is going to happen now. Because at first you go into some of these urban core neighborhoods and they go, sure, white guy from Johnson County, CEO of this big company, you're here to help me and I won't ever see you again. And that's not untypical in America. I want to do enough to make me lose my guilt. And so you have to show up this Saturday and next Saturday. Then you show up Wednesday with the tree trimming group. And then you show up the next week and all of a sudden curbs are being repaired that are being repaired everywhere else in the city but those neighborhoods. And you have to prove it to them,
yes.
I think, time and time again.
I think that's my question too, is the education piece. Front page of your paper, your school chief is leaving, and you've had a very tumultuous public school scenario in the last years. How is that relating to the Big Five? How does new leadership connect to, and I'm particularly interested in the revitalizing Big Five unit. How does that going to work or not work?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you're right about this morning's paper announces the departure of our Kansas City, Missouri School District Superintendent Steve Green to Atlanta. We're sorry to see Steve go. He's a terrific person. He's a great educator. He's done a terrific job for a difficult circumstance with that district for the last 3 years. We understand the reasons for his move, both professionally and also because his kids and grandkids are in Atlanta. And Greg and I both relate to kids and grandkids. So we hate to lose Steve. The Kansas City, Missouri district, which he headed, is actually the urban core district. In the city of Kansas City, Missouri, as Greg mentioned, it's a big geographic city, probably the fourth biggest geographically in the country. All are parts of about 15 different school districts in the city of Kansas City, Missouri. Just in the city of Kansas City, Missouri. I mean, there's dozens and dozens more throughout greater Kansas City, but just in the city itself. In the absolute urban core, that's the Kansas City, Missouri School District. It just happens to have the name Kansas City, Missouri. When I moved to Kansas City, I'm not a native, 40 years ago, that district probably had 85,000 students. Today it's closer to about 13 to 15, something like that. So it shrunk a lot. So in terms of the number of kids that are being educated there, it's not nearly as big as a lot of other districts. On the other hand, those are kids who really need our support, need and deserve our support to get the best education that our community can possibly provide for them. And there is a tie-in. One of the Big Five is not to fix the school district. We're not brave enough for that. That's not one of the Big Five. On the other hand, the Urban Neighborhood Initiative and the kindergarten readiness relate directly to that. They relate directly to that because in the Urban Neighborhood Initiative, education is one of the 3 or 4 most important priorities, probably maybe second after public safety. If you don't have a safe community, everything else is just lip service. So public safety, education, health, and jobs, those are the 4 priorities. And so a lot of this ties directly to it, but it's not directly related to the Kansas City, Missouri School District.
Is David Worm, are you the next speaker? Your next speaker is infinitely more qualified to talk about it, by the way, than Jim or me.
Greg?
He takes the hard questions.
Question over
back
here.
Greg, applaud your initiative with the Dolly Parton project. Out of our Madison, Wisconsin trip came a handbook for new parents called My Baby Handbook that I co-wrote with help of Karen Hills, a neonatal expert at Baptist Hospital, and another one of our members, Molly Sullivan. And I'd be glad to give it to you. It's not big enough for a coffee table. It's only 2 pages, but it teaches new parents what they can do to prepare their baby for a world of wonderment and learning. And it's real simple stuff, and I'd like to share it with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Back here. Oops,
I have a
sorry.
question back here, I think, too.
Okay, so you want me to go first?
Okay. You'll get comments from both of us.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Jim's been on
Thank
both
you.
sides too. So you've
Yes,
been government and
indeed,
you've
yeah.
been. The process was to have involvement. So we had, Johnson County is our big suburban county on the Kansas side, and we had them, all their mayors and the mayor from Kansas City, Kansas, involved in one of the No Bad Ideas sessions. And then we had an Eastern Jackson County, so the counties east of here, session for those mayors. We had Mayor James, Kansas City, Missouri's mayor, lead a session. And so we had them in local government. We had them involved completely. Then when it came time to go from 182 to 5, we excluded government. So we're the Chamber of Commerce, right? And our job was to decide what do we believe. I'll tell you what, people in this country are, I know it's good fare today to make fun of CEOs and tell they're all overpaid and they're basically evil bastards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And most of you are in business, therefore you come to work every day with some greedy notion that you're going to get all you can get and do as little as possible. And obviously it's not fair. And so I think that at the same time, the average American is looking to business today to step up and show some damn leadership in this country about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do and what we're going to do next, because they certainly trust you more than they do trust other people who have to get reelected every 2 years or who are always having to try to raise another nickel. And I just think that system in many ways is just broken now. And so I think that what we did was we involved them at first, and then we completely excluded them, and then now our job is to get them back engaged in trying to make some of those things happen, like the state of Missouri, who's helping us on entrepreneurship, and the city of Kansas City, Missouri, who's helping us on all sorts of stuff. And it's been without a hitch, I'd say.
And Greg is exactly right. We have a really strong relationship with Mayor James, whom you'll actually spend some time with tomorrow. I think he's your last speaker. Greg and I have a very close relationship with Mayor James, like Scott and me. He's a recovering lawyer, by the way. And so we have a really strong relationship with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and with a number of our other local elected officials. What's kind of interesting is when there was a school of thought, not necessarily Greg's or mine, but there was a school of thought when we began, that when we got to the Big Five, the punchline, the bottom line would be what we asked the state of Kansas, Topeka, or the state of Missouri, Jefferson City, for. By the time we actually got there, though, that had all gone away. One, those legislatures are not very responsive to us. I think you have some of this issue in Kentucky. When I talk to folks in northern Kentucky and in Louisville and Lexington, I think your legislature sometimes is not as responsive to urban issues as you might like, and that's true in both of our state capitals. Plus, at that time in particular, they had no money. They had no money. They were trying to figure out a way to fund state government. So all of that just dropped away. There was no wish list or request list. It was all, we'll do it ourselves. Now we're at a point where some of these issues, we actually go to the state for matching funds, never for a handout, but for matching funds after we've already done the legwork, the homework, have established as a credible proposition and raised at least half the money ourselves. So that's about all we do with government. But the local government piece is really important.
May I?
Oh, yes, sir.
Let me thank you, first of all, for your openness and honesty. Incredible discussion. I want you to say a word about the Liberty Bank. Is it in the urbanization area? It has failed, I think, and been revitalized. Black-owned bank, and I guess it's across the river. Is that right? Is it on the
story,
other?
but I really don't.
About Liberty Bank?
Yes.
Oh, Liberty Bank. You want me to do this?
I don't really know. this.
Liberty, it's a cool story.
Say something about the relevance and the value add of that, please.
Two things. Liberty Bank, for those of you who are not familiar with Liberty Bank in Kansas City was initially something called Brotherhood Bank. And I actually worked with them as a lawyer. And that bank basically failed and was acquired as a part of Liberty Bank, which is one of, if not the largest, African-American owned or majority owned bank in America. And we have an important branch of Liberty Bank here, and the Chamber, by the way, has accounts there. I made a point, it started several years ago, I said we need to have some of our funds in African-American owned banks and Liberty Bank, so we have that. And yesterday, remember when I was here yesterday morning, and Bob said Jim has to go now for the Chamber's annual celebration of our Small Business of the Year, which was hugely successful, by the way, and a really nice article in this morning's Kansas City Star. Some of you may have seen about that. But one of our three co-chairs for that is the head of Liberty Bank in Kansas City. So it's a success story in Kansas City, and the Chamber has a pretty strong relationship there.
Next,
Yes, sir.
yes. You're talking, in my impression is, you're talking about a very open mindset conversation, not a fixed mindset type conversation. Did you have to do much preparation with your community that was going to be involved in this conversation to change their thinking about failure, or the option that you might not succeed in doing something that you chose as one of your big fives?
So, and how we chose?
Not necessarily how you chose, but in the 7 hours, I guess, that I've been listening to the leaders of Kansas City, you have a very, if you're familiar with the book, you have a very open mindset thought.
Yeah.
You don't have a fixed mindset. None of the people that stood on the stage and have conversed with us have taken a fixed mindset approach
We
to
keep the
anything they've
others
done.
hidden.
Pardon me?
I said we keep the others hidden. So our No Bad Idea meetings and our cutting meetings were off the charts open minded. It was debated and fought and discussed, and it was just as candid as Jim and I are with every audience we ever talk to. So the most closed-minded people were the most successful people coming into the meeting. So I don't know what happens to people after they've had a little dose of success. They think they're right all the time. Whereas what I've learned as I've gone up the chain of command in my company is I'm dumber and dumber on all the issues because there's so many in front, of me. And so you basically have to be a better listener, not a better decider. But I'd say a few of the people that were, the most successful people in the room were, okay, I'm going to give you an hour because Fred asked me to come, but this won't work. It won't be a success. Let me tell you why. If you two would just listen to me, et cetera, et cetera. But, so I'm going to think one in particular, who I won't name either, who started that way, maybe halfway through our No Bad Ideas meetings, was combining universities and, stuff that was just off the charts of big ideas. And so I just think sometimes just you have to have a little patience with them. and realize that there's stumbling blocks. And then I think at some point, once people realized this is a go, we started having people come back to later meetings because they didn't want to be left out. And they wanted their idea to be heard, or they'd be contacting Jim and I, privately. If this idea goes, I've got your back, or whatever. And so I think there was probably some, but it was never an obstacle.
No, and I think I'll give you an example in a second that stuck with me about open-mindedness. On these No Bad Ideas meetings, we had really kind of three things we had to constantly remind people of. One of them Greg mentioned earlier, and that is that it has to be a very specific idea, not just a general concept. We also had to remind people that we just wanted to get the ideas, the no bad ideas, on the table. The sessions weren't there to debate whether that idea was doable, achievable, or not doable, not achievable. And the other thing we had to remind them was, we're not here to compare ideas. We're not here to say that idea is better than this one or that one. It's just get the ideas on the table. Now here's the example of open-mindedness. At the time we were doing this, the city of Kansas City, Missouri was involved in an election, a citywide election to renew its 1% earnings tax. This is about 42% of the city of Kansas City, Missouri's budget. This is critical. Chamber led that charge. We got a huge turnout, even bigger than in the mayor's race, which had preceded it, and we got like 78% of the vote. So huge success. But in the middle of all this campaign was going on. So one of our no bad ideas, hosted at Commerce Bank, one of our other two largest banks in town, in the probably noon hour, followed immediately a morning debate, which was televised and on radio, as well as a live audience. And in that no bad ideas that afternoon were two of the people on polar opposite sides of this earnings tax issue. And I had been there that morning, actually as a part of the debate, and watched these two individuals go after each other tooth and tong. That afternoon, though, in a No Bad Ideas meeting, one of them suggested an idea. And immediately, the other person from across the room said, yeah, and we could also, as a part of that, do, and the two of them together created a no bad idea that was better than the one initiated. So that's an example of open-mindedness and how it came together in this context.
We must be done.
Bob, you're here to tell us we're finished, huh?
Well, let me ask one final question and get a quick answer. So if I was the Greg or the Jim out in this audience that took on an issue like this, how much personal time did you have to put into this? And was it worth it?
Oh, it was clearly worth it, but I have a full-time job, and I probably had 1,000 hours, I would say. So it's probably half of a full-time job the year that I was chamber chair, but my God, it was awesome. Yeah. It was awesome.
I would say the same thing. All of our chairs, just like all of your chairs, I'm sure, Bob, are extraordinarily generous with their time for the chamber. Greg, especially so, and particularly in the Big Five. That's 1,000 hours. That's a lot of hours, and I'm sure that if anything, that might be conservative. It was the biggest thing that I certainly did that year, and continues to be a big part of my job today. But I'm absolutely with Greg. Is it worth it? You bet. It's easily one of the most rewarding things I think either of us would say we've ever done in terms of the civic scene. I like to read leadership books, and I know a lot of them are awful, but sometimes you never know what you're going to get out of them. And the last one I was reading, it said, great leaders believe in something. And they are incredibly optimistic that they can make them happen. And I think that's what it takes to start.
Let's show our appreciation to Jim and Greg.
Thanks, sir. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.